So for the next of the Catapult High Performance Practitioner interviews, I've got Ben Rosenblatt with me, who many people will know has been involved in elite sports performance as an S&C coach for the last 10 years or so. Currently, Ben's in camp with the Great Britain men's and women's hockey teams in preparation for the upcoming Olympics. So thanks very much for joining me, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate that. It's possibly going to be useful, I suppose, really for people watching this in the first instance. If you could just give a little bit of an overview as to your journey in elite sport and I suppose the role that you're undertaking at the moment in this critical period for hockey.
Okay, yeah. So we start with where we are now. We're towards the end of the Olympic cycle, the most exciting bit. We've got 50 days until the Olympic Games. We've got the Champions Trophy tournament, which is a men's and women's tournament. The two sides are playing against the top 6 teams in the world. And then we come out of that, and both the men and women have different programs and different schedules in the build-up to travel to Rio. Most of it involves matches and some short periods for recovery and physical preparation. My journey into this role here was I've played football and boxed at a very, very low level. Football was less painful than boxing to be bad at. Yeah. And then what did I do? I went to, I was personal training, and I really loved the sporting aspect. I love playing sport and being involved in sport. So I decided to go to university to study to become a strength and conditioning coach. I was fortunate enough to get opportunities to travel to America and to coach out at Long Beach State University. To work with the university athletics, football and rugby team, because they didn't have anything set up and I was keen to do it. And then from there I went on to the Olympic Medical Institute, which was a rehabilitation centre. There I left to go to Birmingham City, where I was head of sports science and fitness for 1.5 seasons. And then I left to go to the BOA, set up an intensive residential rehab unit. And I was there for the London Olympic cycle. And then I really missed working in team sports, but I loved the Olympic sports. I loved the Olympics. Throughout that period of time, I was completing my PhD and coaching judo fighters. We had some success at London, and I really missed the sort of day-to-day interaction with the players and coaching them on a long-term journey. And I was fortunate enough to take on the women's lead role for hockey from Dave Hamilton, and here we are now.
So, both the men's and women's teams are in camp in preparation for the Olympics. It's quite an extended camp, so I imagine this is a sort of a period of unprecedented opportunity for yourself as an S&C coach to actually do some real meaningful work in terms of honing people really ready for competition.
Well, in my mind, I think the Great Britain Olympic hockey teams are the best team sports that you could probably work with, because they're now both teams are now centralised, so they train together all year round, 4 days a week, every week, usually with a week off, an opportunity for them to make some money, week off every kind of fourth week. So what it means is, and because we probably play between 60 and 90 international matches a year, but most of them are condensed into tournaments or sort of test match series. So what it means is we do get extended periods of time where we can just train and get better. And as an S&C coach, you do get the opportunity to push them on physically, to individualise their training programmes based on their performance needs and their injury risks. And you don't really get that opportunity in a team sport environment in any other team sport, certainly in the UK.
So, obviously with this consolidated period of time, you've got a real opportunity then to build a fairly detailed picture of each athlete and their needs. Does that mean that the strength programs, S&C programs, are very much individualised, or are they things that have a generic core to them that may be a little bit more focused by position, or can you actually get right down to the nitty-gritty so that everyone is actually tailored absolutely to the needs of that person?
Yeah, so if we take the training philosophy within the group of athletes I'm working with now, it's hierarchical, and there's 3 things we're trying to achieve. The first is training durability. Like, the most important thing for the athletes that we've got here is they can consistently play intensive hockey training, and the coaches can do the work that they need to with them. So my job is to work with the physios to understand what each athlete's injury risk need is and put an individualised training programme based on some known benchmarks for that. So we can undertake a kind of screening and diagnostic process, and then which is kind of generic, and then individualise the programmes off the back of that, and then work with the coaches to manage training loads to make sure they can continue to train. The next thing is about developing tournament durability. The tournaments we have, like this one for example, is 6 matches in 9 days. The kind of work rates are around 200 to 220 metres per minute. It's rolling substitutions. Yeah. It's fairly high demanding game where they're getting the bodies into some extreme positions. And the Olympics will be 8 matches in 13 days. So if you want to win stuff, you've got to be as good on the last day as you are on the first. And the way the tournaments are structured now, you've got to be consistent right the way through. So developing tournament durability is vital. And again, what we've done is we've undertaken some sort of studies to try and find out or map or profile the what makes a durable athlete, a durable player. And we found that we've got certain thresholds of strength and fitness to be able to, based on the individual playing line. So again, we can make sure that each player's got an individualised programme to support that. And then if we've delivered those two things, it's then about game impact, and it's really engaging with the coaches and saying, well, you want the athletes out every single day training, you want the players to be able to last the tournaments. Now what's going to change their game for them? What's the thing that's going to make the difference? And I don't want to know about it from a physical perspective. I want to know it on the pitch. Let's have a look at the videos. Do they need to sprint more? Do they need to, are they making the wrong decisions at the wrong time? And let's see if we can find a solution to that. So I suppose individualisation has got a real theme throughout all of from my perspective at least, all the training that we do against sort of group generic objectives.
And just to kind of, I suppose, put an objective element to that. So generally speaking, what sort of period of time in a typical week would they spend on the field training or conditioning?
We'll do 10 hours of pitch-based training per week. So if the sort of general weekly structure for an international hockey player in the centralised programme will be Monday morning pitch, Monday afternoon S&C, which is usually speed or strength orientated. Tuesday will be a low intensity pitch session. Tuesday afternoon will be a high intensity pitch session. Both will last 2 hours. All the pitch sessions last 2 hours. Wednesday is a low intensity pitch session and gym. And Thursday is a high intensity pitch session for 2 hours. Friday is gym, and then they have the weekend away from the programme, but they'll typically do a running based conditioning session on Saturday. On top of that, within the club season, they're contracted to play for their clubs at the weekend, so they'll have one club game and they'll have one training session a week for their club as well, which will take place in the evening.
So the volumes of work that these athletes are actually undertaking, as far as I can see, actually far exceed that are being undertaken in other team sports. So football, for example, or rugby. Very different sports, I know, but nevertheless, the volume of work has got to be huge by comparison.
It kind of has to be. So I think, so typically RPE-wise, we probably get between 4,000 to 6,000 units worth of work a week, which is high. But again, it has to be because of the demands of the tournament and the opportunity that we have. We don't have to compete. Like the club competition isn't the same standard as international competition, which is slightly different in other sports where the difference between club and international competition can be quite narrow.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas in hockey, the sort of gulf is enormous, both in terms of the intensity of the matches and the technical abilities of the players as well. So it means that we've just got an opportunity to train and do work with them, and they can pitch up for their clubs and be fatigued and it not be too much of an issue, other from an injury risk perspective.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, you take responsibility both for the, if you like, the indoor and the outdoor conditioning, so the strength work, conditioning work in the gym, and also the on-field conditioning work. Do you have I suppose, a curriculum for the on-field stuff whereby certain components are targeted at different times in the week, in the macro cycle, and so on and so forth?
I suppose my overall philosophy is it's a hockey-driven programme. It's not a physical driven program. Although if you ask our head coach, he'd probably tell you this the other way around. It's quite a strong philosophy I've got here. That, you know, our ambition is to become the world's best hockey team, not the world's fittest hockey team. And what that means is the coaches have got to make the decisions around training first, and it's my job to advise them around constraints around the sessions or the drills or the activities they're undertaking, to try and develop or to try and map some sort of physical development throughout that. What we try and do is, again, it's quite nice that we know what the tournament demand is. At the Olympics we have to play our first 5 matches in 7 days, which is fairly extreme, and we want to make sure that we're kind of giving our players an opportunity to experience that on a relatively frequent basis. So what that means is that if we take a 4-week block, for example, we'll have 1 week which is we'll build them up, and then the second week we'll call it a 5 and 7 week, and which fits quite nicely from a block periodisation perspective. And basically what that means is we do additional conditioning, we let the handbrake off on the coaches, and we push them hard for the entirety of the 2-hour sessions. The next week we try and make it more competition orientated, play a lot more 11v11. We try to organise international matches with other teams that week, and then the 4th week there's a decentralised training week, so they'll have no hockey whatsoever. And so it's sort of broadly from a kind of macro cycle perspective that we try to stack up blocks like that. But obviously we can't always get the international teams in at the right times. Competitions get in the way of that as well. And we've probably only stacked up maybe 4 of those cycles within the last year. So 4 out of 12 months in Olympic prep.
So quite clearly the challenges that you're going to be facing when you get out into Rio around the fact that there are so many games in such a short space of time, which once again, if you were to go to, I don't know, World Cup rugby or World Cup football, you don't see that occur. So that condensed period of time sounds horrific. Are there any additional sort of environmental challenges that you're having to prepare for as well, given that the games are in Rio?
Well, not necessarily in Rio. Like the temperature is going to be warm, so we hope it's going to be a warm summer's day, because it's the winter over in Rio. So we're expecting it to be a kind of warm summer's day in the UK, maybe a little bit muggier. So we're not necessarily going too heavy on our acclimation for this, but we might do for other countries. Like we had to play a 6-match test series in Perth, which was all played in 40-degree heat, and that was fairly extreme. Some of the major challenges we have is, for example, when we go to somewhere like Argentina, which we typically go every year, the temperature prediction might be somewhere between 35 and 42 degrees, and sometimes with some nice humidity as well to match. Excuse me. But when typically what happens is we then do sort of a 2-week acclimation block where we do stuff like, we've done a series of different experiments to see which raises core temperature, how do we find ways of raising and retaining core body temperature. So we sometimes get them in the players in a sauna, get them from the sauna into a sweatsuit, and then out in training. We do gym, and we have an environmental chamber at Bisham Abbey, so we're fortunate we can do bike sessions or some gym sessions in there, or we just jam them in the sauna for half an hour after the end of the session to give them a rise in that core body temperature and a retention within, because that's the thing that stimulates the adaptation. But then sometimes you get over there, you've done 2 weeks of heat acclimation, and it's sort of pissing down with rain for the first 6 days, and then you'll have the sort of, we had this in our last tournament over there. We did 2 weeks of acclimation. We got there, it was raining for 5 days. Our next 3 games were at night, and then we had to play Australia at 42 degrees at midday. And so, but all the work you've done is and that's a real challenge for us. So you're running around Argentina looking for saunas.
Great stuff. Ben, let me just sort of wind the clock back a little bit then, because I think that the majority of your professional career has actually been spent more dealing with injured athletes perhaps than dealing with the fit athletes, the team sports athletes that you're with at the moment. And I think one of the challenges that fitness coaches, S&C coaches, sports scientists, call it what you will, sometimes face in that particular environment is trying to ensure that philosophies between different professions are complementary. Quite clearly, in that particular environment, you're having to work very, very closely with physiotherapists.
Yeah.
I wonder whether you found that easy, or whether there's been times where it's been a little bit challenging to find some common ground when you're dealing. You've got this shared ownership of an injured athlete that you both want the best for, but perhaps there's a little bit of a difference in terms of the philosophy that you hold.
It's classic, isn't it? Yeah, it is a real difficult one, and a lot of it comes down to. I'd say from my perspective, and what I encourage from the people who I work with as well, is that. My philosophy and my thoughts are very much is we're here to solve the problems that the athletes are facing, and I've got different skills, experiences, time constraints which I'm able to, and you've got different skills, time constraints, experiences, etc. And therefore, this is the problem the athlete's facing. What are we actually trying to achieve? Who's got the skills, the experience to actually go and resolve it? And then, therefore, it doesn't matter what your title is or what your kind of professional background is. It matters who's best put in place to go and deliver that particular job of work. So that was an approach that we took at the intensive rehab unit, where we had a multidisciplinary team, sort of variety of practitioners with different experiences, and it was just very, very much a case of, okay, this is the athlete, this is what they're facing, how are we going to resolve it, and how and let's kind of chuck our egos away and see what the problem or the issues are that this person's facing, and who's got skills and sometimes the time to go and deliver these different aspects as well. I mean, you and me, we've got similar job titles or similar roles or experiences, and we could have a clash about what we think's right for that particular athlete, regardless. So even if it's a physio or an S&C coach. So I think if everyone comes in with that mindset, then we typically have a much better outcome. Getting everybody to that mindset is the most challenging place. And also, so from my perspective, one of the things I was try to learn a lot, and learn by listening and talking and asking questions and listening. So rather than going and beavering away in the textbooks and learning everything that there was to know about some sort of meniscus problem, if you're the physio I'm working with, I want to know everything that you know about the meniscus problem and this athlete and this person, and try and learn as much for you, and then see how can I help, or ask sometimes challenging questions about things like exercise selection, loading regimes, measures of improvement or criteria for progression, but use it based on the stuff that you've given me rather than the stuff that I've gone away and beavered away on myself. Because that's the thing that creates a clash. Because if I'm as an S&C coach or a sports scientist, we're not necessarily trained in. We're definitely not trained in clinical diagnostics. Sometimes our level of functional anatomy is relatively poor, and clinical biomechanics, and etiology of injury, healing. These are things that we're typically not trained in, but we do know a lot about exercise selection. We do know a lot about managing loading regimes, about the principles of training, and so it's about how those things can complement each other. So if I respect what I don't know and what you do know, then maybe we'll get on better, and more importantly, the athlete will get better from us.
Good stuff. I mean, something that you have certainly developed an expertise in, which is a real interest to me because of the way that it seems it's to have been something that's been adopted across sport at the moment, is the use of localised hypoxia. Both from a rehabilitation perspective, but also from the conditioning of healthy athletes. I'm just wondering what sort of pricked your interest in that particular approach.
I mean, definitely. That was at the intensive rehab unit. We were seeing lots of people come in. So our most common injuries were knee injuries and back injuries. Typical knee injury, they'd gone to surgery, and then you'd sort of look at them, they'd have half a leg there, they're totally atrophied. And then the kind of, it's like, well, what are we going to do about this thing? Because their ability to close force around their joint by producing muscle force is compromised by the size and the strength of their muscle tissue. But the only way we know we can get some sort of size or strength back is by putting loads through the muscle that the joint can't tolerate. So how do we resolve it? did lots of different things relatively inconsistently, like isometrics, like fatiguing stuff on the bike, complex-based work, nutritional interventions. Sometimes we sat and just waited. And then Pete Atkinson, who was my boss at the time, slid me a paper, which was the Venbon review paper, 2008. And he said, why don't you have a read of this? And there was some stuff that UK Sport were looking at as well. So I said, all right, well, let's give this a go then. I tried it on myself. Got everything totally wrong, as you typically do when you do that. And then we agreed as a team, there was one particular athlete who was a bobsleigh athlete, and we said, okay, well, this could be an appropriate intervention. This is a scenario, this could work. I've tried, let's give this a go and try it. And thankfully the team I was with were forward thinking. And what we said was we're going to collect a lot of data on it. So we did ultrasound of the muscle, we collected the isokinetic data, and we collected all of our train load data and response data as well. So then we were in a position where we could really objectively decide whether this had made an improvement for this athlete or not. And it had done, and in fact we learned something from it. And for me, the most important kind of message that I learned from that was actually that if we collect really, really good data frequently on an n=1 basis, each time we do a novel intervention or something different with an athlete, you can learn from it.
Yeah.
And you can learn, and you can keep your team learning from it as well. It keeps everybody honest, and it keeps challenging your decision-making process. So that's how I came across it, and that's how it started working with it. And then we had some fantastic discussions with the medical team, and recently published a paper on developing a risk assessment to make sure that kind of who's safe and who might be unsafe for using it, which I think is really important. We're now in a position where I'm supervising a PhD of a guy called Luke Hughes, who's looking at it with potentially for use within patients with arthritis. So I'm fascinated by the area still, and hopefully we can use it across a broad spectrum of sort of sporting and society to affect it.
So do you advocate its use at the moment with healthy team sports athletes that might be somewhat load compromised?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's all about it. I mean, it's another tool in your toolbox to, it's about, fundamentally it's about resolving the issues that the players are facing, and it's an effective tool in certain circumstances, and a potent one as well.
Yeah.
One of some of the ways that I've used it for healthy athletes, for example, you get a large influx of satellites, so a large growth of satellite cells when you do that type of work. So if we know that an athlete's going into a heavy period of competition or a heavy period of training, like a Christmas period in football, for example, or 8 matches in 13 days at the Olympics, having more satellites or a heavy training camp, having more satellite cells and essentially a greater adaptive capacity of the muscle might be something that the muscles might want to have to be able to absorb the higher loads that they're facing. Yeah. Or, for example, we work in a female team. I work in a female team sport, or there's other female sports, and during heavy periods of competition or sport-specific training, sometimes there'll be a decay in muscle mass or muscle function. So how do we try and retain their muscle function during these heavy periods without actually compromising the training that they're doing?
Sure.
So doing a small bout of blood flow restricted exercise at the end of the day on a frequent basis could be something that could retain it, alongside some nutritional interventions as well. So I think there's certainly a role for it, and the more you understand about the mechanisms of how it works, and the more you understand about the athlete you're working with and the context you're facing, I suppose the better able you are to be able to make a decision about whether it's the right thing to use.
Sure, it's a fascinating area, and as I say, the football clubs that I visit now, you see it regularly used with rehab players, and increasingly so with healthy players. But as I say, the load compromised ones. One final question. Everything to date has been about yourself over the past 10 years. As an S&C coach, if I was to ask you to look into the future, what's the next big thing in S&C? Is there a next big thing, or is it just about doing the basic things well, or better than we are at the moment? Or is there something that you can see that actually might have a huge influence on the effectiveness of our practice?
I think you've struck on a really interesting word there, which is effectiveness. And I think with the amount of information that we collect understanding of how teams operate together, that there hopefully will be a greater strive for effectiveness in lots of different areas. So I mean, I'm really hoping that, say, the conversation we were having before about the sort of conflicts between the medical personnel and training, you know, coaches, for example, or the you know, some of those decision-making processes. I'm really hoping we put a lot more emphasis and energy behind effective teams and effective decision-making, and more effective ways of working together, because I think fundamentally that's the thing that makes stuff happen. I think that there's going to be a lot more sort of cross-contamination of research and practice across different spheres. So things like the wearable technology, for example, you know, where is the growth and where is that sort of sector and industry going, and then in lots of different areas, and how can sport evolve from it. So the more that we can link in with lots of different sectors, I think, again, the more able we are to be effective with the stuff that we can use. And I think we're in an interesting place from a data perspective as well at the moment, where we're collecting more data that we've probably got the skills to know how to use. Yeah. Well, I speak personally there. I really, really hope that we're able to continue to collect this type of information, but we have a better understanding of how to use it, and we can link in with data scientists and maybe start kind of automatically process some of this complex and rich information to tie into some of our really good decision-making processes that we know how to make as an effective team.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time. I know this is a ridiculously busy time for you, and probably the last thing you want to be doing is sat here talking to me. So thanks very much. Yeah. I've really enjoyed it, and I wish you all the very best in Rio.
Thanks very much.
A lot,
Thank you, Chris.
Cheers.
Thank you.